Good morning, I'm Matt Driskill, editor of Asian Aviation Magazine and AsianAviation.com. Today we're in conversation with Anand Stanley. He's president for Asia-Pacific at Airbus. Anand, welcome to In Conversation. Thanks for joining me again.
Thanks for having me, Matt. It's an honor to be here.
First of all, again, congratulations being named Asia-Pacific. You took up your new post in July, I think. Obviously, it's not been a good year at all for aviation. Lately, as we talk here at the end of the end of November, vaccines are making a lot of news and things like that. But how did it feel to get the top job for Asia in the middle of the pandemic? Did it change your plans for the region? Did it have any change? Did it affect your priorities, for example?
Well, first of all, it's been a real honor for me to get this role. I'm really grateful to Airbus for putting their trust in me for this really important region for Airbus. As you know, Matt, the COVID-19 pandemic has been the most significant crisis to have affected our industry. And the pandemic has changed our focus from day-to-day business to really managing the crisis more than anything else. We've had to adapt our production rate, we've had to manage cash containment, and most importantly, we've had to work with our customers to find possible solutions during these extraordinary and challenging times.
I watched your interview recently on Channel News Asia. As I said before, we got to give them a shout out. They have me on sometimes as well. In that interview, you said aviation is in for a long recovery. Governments need to open up faster with risk-based efforts. Pre-departure testing, for example. IATA is developing a travel pass. I did an interview with Jennifer Zhu Scott at the Commons Project. They've got the Common Pass that they're developing as well. That would use it would be like a digital health pass. Are governments listening to ICAO and AAPA and IATA? What's the solution to getting borders reopened and getting international travel restarted?
Well, you're correct in that, aviation is really a key part of our economies here, especially in Asia Pacific. And it's a key part of our economic growth because we drive about 50 million jobs and about $1 trillion in the GDP in the region. But it's also been the first region that's been impacted, and it's taking much longer than we expected it to recover. The governments here have some of the toughest restrictions in the world in the Asia Pacific region, and some of the toughest quarantine measures in the world. And we commend their efforts in trying to manage risk and manage the health, but it's had a significant impact on air traffic. And we believe we recommend and we encourage that the governments move towards more evidence-based, risk-based strategies, which drives a more testing-based approach rather than a pure border shutdown strategy or a quarantine-based strategy. We're seeing some improvements. We especially see this with Singapore. We see them doing unilateral or bilateral travel bubbles or agreements, which we believe is really good. And we hope that many more of the governments in the Asia-Pacific region move towards such an approach. And we believe this will restart air travel and in turn restart and have the positive cascading effect on the economies of this region.
Yeah, we saw that travel bubble was actually supposed to open on the 22nd between Singapore and Hong Kong, but Hong Kong had a few more cases, and so they've had to defer that for a little bit. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that as well. I mean, Singapore, the COVID situation here is really good compared to a lot of other states. I think yesterday there was either 0 or 1 local case or something, and there were a few that were imported. So it will be interesting to see what happens. In that same interview, you talked about China and aircraft development. COMAC is developing commercial aircraft. Talk to me a little bit about that. I know that and also it's interesting, we'll get a little trade news in here as well, because COMAC and AVIC in China could be affected by the U.S., certain trade embargoes on certain technologies, and the Chinese manufacturers are using a lot of components from the West. How do you see China developing as a competitor to Airbus and Boeing?
Well, it's important that we recognize that the current duopoly between Airbus and Boeing will not last forever, and we need to respect Chinese manufacturers and that they are future competitors. The Chinese market, and because it has a very large domestic market, is certainly big enough to support more than two manufacturers. So we welcome competition.
Do you think it will drive the moves with the U.S. to restrict certain technologies? Is that going to drive China to develop its own in-house technologies in terms of engines and avionics?
I cannot comment on specific restrictions that are being discussed or speculated, but what I can comment on is that the Chinese market, especially the domestic market, is a large and growing market, and I strongly believe that there is enough space for three players.
Okay. Airbus has been on record. You're looking at 15,000 job cuts, unions in France, which are a notorious bunch. I know because I lived in Paris for 2 years and had to walk to work one time when I was working for the International Herald Tribune there. But the unions recently signed on board to come along with the job cuts and different things like that. How have the employees in Asia affected at places like Tianjin at your final assembly plant there?
So this pandemic has been one of the deepest crises we've ever faced, and this is for the industry as a whole. And Airbus has moved swiftly to adapt, and this has also included social adaptation measures and social adaptation plans. Outside of Europe, we've had to impact about 1,300 positions outside of Europe. And this has impacted Airbus across the world. But I would like to say that, especially in Asia and in terms of our local operations, we continue to be committed to the region in terms of our operations, in terms of our partnerships, especially our industrial partnerships. And I do want to mention that last week, I'm happy to let you know that we had inaugurated our new campus in Singapore, which will serve as our regional hub for Asia-Pacific. And this should really, I would say, be a clear and strong symbol for our commitment to the entire Asia-Pacific region.
A little bit earlier, you talked about the effect of COVID on the entire industry. We know it's been tough, and that it involves discussions with your customers. I know from my life experience, my father used to work for a steel fabricator that actually built airplane hangars at certain places. And it was his job to make sure that the company got paid for when a contractor would buy steel from them. So I know those conversations can be difficult, and I blame my father for me becoming a reporter and learning how to ask difficult questions. Some of those customers are easier to deal with. You have Mr. Al-Bakar at Qatar, who said that Boeing and Airbus have no alternative but to oblige the airline on deferrals. I know you're not going to discuss individual customers, and I wouldn't ask you to, but how do you talk to those customers on deferrals, and are some easier to deal with than others?
Well, since the crisis has begun, I've been in contact, and we've been in contact with almost every customer of ours, and they all have very different needs, but they're all in this crisis, and we're all in this crisis together. Our goal is to find solutions which to each and every customer, and many of them have to be customized. And I can't comment on any specific discussions, but what I can tell you is that we've reached agreements with the majority, almost all of our customers, And even though some of these discussions are tough because we're in a crisis, most of the customers have been thanking us for our flexibility, and it shows Airbus's customer focus, because that is key for the future of not just Airbus, but the survival of the industry and the ecosystem. What we have observed, though, is that to come out of this crisis, many of the airlines will have to focus on the most efficient aircraft. And we believe we have the right products to meet them there and meet their needs there.
Well, let's talk about that for a couple of reasons. I mean, ICAO and IATA recently were talking about promoting sustainable aviation fuel. They've been talking about using this crisis as a way to make the industry more green, more environmentally friendly. Airbus itself, you're talking about, you announced a few weeks back that you were talking about developing a hydrogen-powered aircraft. Said you hope to have something flying by 2035. How serious is Airbus about a hydrogen-powered aircraft? Because to me, it seems for that kind of a moonshot project, you would need to put together an industry-wide consortium with engine makers and hydrogen producers and airports and regulators. And I'm wondering how serious the company is about that.
Well, we're very serious about the reduction of CO2 emissions and improving our aircraft performance. This has been something that we've been working on for a long time. And our ambition, as you correctly pointed out, is to bring the first zero-emission aircraft to the market by the mid-2030s. And we're investing in a number of technology pathways and a number of aerodynamic configurations. Hydrogen has emerged as the clear game changer because it ticks all the right boxes. It is safe, it is versatile, it's lightweight, it's storable, either as compressed gas or liquid, and it has a very high energy density, 3 times the energy density of traditional jet fuel. But beyond the technology challenges, the key success factor here is really how do we get support from the regulatory agencies, and how do we manage to solve the infrastructure challenge in terms of being able to support this. But because airports will need significant infrastructure support to transition. But overall, we are very serious about this, and we feel this is the right technology vector.
You touched on it just a little while ago that sort of the future for aviation is more efficient aircraft. We know that aviation is going to be hurting for years. Again, the data from IATA and other associations, pre-COVID travel levels won't come back till 2024 at the earliest, although a vaccine could change that game tremendously. Domestic travel is coming back in China, for example. And they're using the narrow-body aircraft for a lot of domestic travel. Is that what the new normal is going to be? Is there going to be less international travel and more narrow-body aircraft flying? Which would be good for Airbus because you sell a really good narrow-body airplane.
Well, that's a good question, but I don't have a crystal ball. But what we can see is that it will take a fair amount of time. It will take a few years for traffic to fully recover. But what we are seeing is that the people are and the airlines are using the most efficient aircraft. We're also seeing that in pockets recovery, especially in countries with large domestic markets. And followed by, we believe the recovery will then be followed by regional markets and then long haul. But in the Asia-Pacific region, just because of its geographic nature, you need air travel. It is a part of the core system, and because of the distances, the only option in some cases is long-distance travel. We believe we have the right products with our new products, such as the 321 XLR, which provides the option for long, thin routes. We also have the most efficient aircraft such as the 330neo and the 350. So we have the right products in place in terms of efficiency. We also believe that the desire and need to connect in a global world will create demand and continue to keep the demand for not just single-aisle aircraft, but also wide-body aircraft.
Anand, I know you're busy and it's Friday, and I know you need to get to work and quit talking to journalists like me. I try to end these interviews with looking for a bright spot or something positive that's going to come out of this year. It's been a really tough year. Is there anything positive that you can look at, or do we have to worry about the next virus that Mother Nature's going to throw at us before we get on a plane?
Well, as I said before, this pandemic, we're facing one of our gravest crises, not just as a company, but as an industry. However, we have seen and overcome multiple crises in the past, whether it was 9/11, SARS, MERS, the avian flu, and the industry has recovered, and we've seen that the quality of our products in this industry has provided a level of safety through these pandemics. One of the positive things that I'd like to mention is that an aircraft, the cabin air quality is one of the safest places to be, because the cabin air quality, because of multiple reasons, because it's recycled, because of the filters, is as safe as the operating room in a hospital. And another thing I would like to also talk to you about is that once we start moving towards more and more standard testing regimes and moving away from a quarantine regime, I do believe that air traffic will start to improve. And last but not least, the fact that we support so many jobs and we're a key driver of the global economy, I strongly believe that the desire for people and companies to travel will come back strong, and I'm very optimistic about the continued importance of our sector in the global and connected world.
Anand Stanley, President for Asia-Pacific at Airbus, thanks for joining me in conversation.
Thank you for having me, Matt.